My name is Nik Colyer. My website is channelingbikerbob.com. I've written 14 novels in the last 25 years. This book, they're making into a movie. The reason why I wrote those novels is because my wife and I were going through a pretty intense time in our relationship at about 5 years. And if you know what 5 years is like, if you've been there at 5 years, you'll know that it's pretty difficult. And we got to this place where things were pretty dark in our relationship. And the only thing we had for one another was our commitment to one another. And at one point, the skies opened up and everything started to work again. And my wife and I decided at that point that we'd come through the fire of relationship and that we'd answered some really basic questions between us, between the masculine and the feminine. And the Channeling Biker Bob series came out of those questions and out of those answers. Now, since then, my wife and I have gone through more struggles. We're now at year 14. And the entire series deals with the questions and answers that we came to through our relationship, through the connection that we made as the masculine and feminine in the greater sense of the word, and also on our personal level. Now, it doesn't mean that these books are about Nik and Barbara. They're about Stuart Chance and Biker Bob and Renee, Stuart's wife, and the kids, and Stuart's boss. At least the first book is. And Stuart is this kind of lost, new age male who can't quite find his masculinity, and everybody seems to walk all over him. His wife, his kids, his boss, the entire world. He's like the ultimate nice guy. And he can't figure out what happened to his, he's got his sensitivity, but what happened to his strength and to his foundation? Biker Bob comes along and helps him re-find his masculinity. Now that's the premise of the first book. In the second book, Biker Bob 2, of course, Lover's Embrace, deals with the angry male. And certainly that piece is inside of me. I began as when my wife and I first met, I began as the soft, flexible, yielding male. And as soon as I came to terms with that and realized that that wasn't appropriate for me standing in my masculine place, I mean, it's certainly appropriate in certain ways, but not as an overall being, then I had to find another way of approaching it. And guess what came up next? Was anger. Was my anger towards women and my anger towards the world. And it turns out that men and women are very angry at one another. And no matter how it comes out, we are. And finding that place, that real place inside of us that's angry, and coming to terms with it, is what we talk about in Biker Bob 2. Now again, it's a novel, so it talks about other characters and playful rides in the desert on Harleys, because the entire series lands in my job at that point was to, okay, I got all this information I want to share. How do I put that into a place where people are going to want to read it and have fun with it? So I landed the entire story on the saddle of a Harley. This puts us into Biker Bob 3, which I decided that I had done both sides of the masculine, the nice guy and the angry side. Now, of course, there were many other sides, but those were the two main ones that I was dealing with. And so what was next? And what was next was to talk about the feminine. Now, Biker Bob 3, Magician's Spell, talks mostly about feminine experience. Renee and her friend Kat take a ride off into the desert on their motorcycles and meet this woman called Cherry. And Cherry and Renee and Kat go deep into the desert. They leave the motorcycles behind, they leave their friends behind, and they walk into the desert, into a woman's canyon. And they have adventures and experiences from this strictly female experience. Biker Bob 3 for me is the pinnacle of my writing. I felt like I was there. I grabbed it. I know how to write now. It's been 25 years. and I got it, and I was able to really carry that story in a real playful and hard-won way. When it was published, I was very proud of it. The Channeling Biker Bob series helps men come out of isolation. Women have a natural ability to stay in community. Us men haven't learned that natural ability. Women find other women to be in community with. They just naturally do that. But us men, we stay in isolation. And oftentimes, we just have our woman as a place where we come out of isolation. And it's fine until we go into conflict with our women. Then we are totally alone. And we have to find a place. Us men really have to find a place to reach out to other men. And that's where men's groups comes in. The men's movement is happening throughout this country, throughout the world. It's just that men do interior work. When the women's movement happened in the 70s, they busted out and they came out into the world big, and they were huge, and they were on the media, and they were doing all of those things that were so amazing. And what happens to us men, and it started in the 80s for men, I believe, is that we have to drop into ourselves. We go into the interior and we do interior work. And that's why the men's movement doesn't look like it's happening. Men get together in small groups of 6 or 8 men, and they do their work together. And what happens is when a man does his work with other men, and we're not talking about talking about baseball or sports, and we're not talking about hunting or anything like that. We're talking about men sitting down and talking about the struggle that they're having in their life, their struggle they're having with one another, the struggle they're having with their women and their children and their bosses. And we're talking about a place where men can find communication levels with other men and hold that space with one another. And when a man does that, you can point him out in a room. You can see what happens to a man after a few months of being in that sort of environment, that his feet are solidly placed on the ground, and he holds the world in a different way. And you can walk into a room and you can almost point him out. I invite you to read the Biker Bob series, and other men's books too, of course. There's a place where men can be together, and where men can hold space for one another. And if you aren't in a men's group, I invite you to go find a men's group. And it can be as simple as putting a note up on a bulletin board. I'm looking for a men's group. There are always men's groups happening everywhere. They're just not very visible. So you can look at my website. You can make contact with me and let me know. And I can put you in touch with some men's groups. Do the interior work. That's the job here. My name is Nik Colyer.